the fall into his world. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Crown shimmered like a universe suspended beneath crystal chandeliers, each facet scattering light across marble floors that echoed with soft orchestral music and the murmured voices of New York's most influential elite. Ava Collins moved through the glittering crowd with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years serving luxury she could never afford to experience, her black uniform perfectly pressed, her hair swept into a smooth twist that kept stray curls away from her face as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. The guests paid more for a single glass of aged wine than Ava earned in an entire shift, yet she carried herself with a calm professionalism that made her nearly invisible, just another shadow moving between wealth and power. She had learned that invisibility was safer than attention, especially in rooms like this where reputations were built from silk and egos shattered like glass. Ava had worked 3 back-to-back shifts this week, not because she enjoyed the endless nights surrounded by people who forgot her the moment she walked past, but because she needed the money. Her dream was not to serve the wealthy, it was to escape the life that forced her to do so. Hidden beneath her bed in her tiny shared apartment was a binder filled with business plans for a community-focused fashion studio where she would design elegant clothing that real women could afford. She had grown up wearing second-hand clothes stitched and altered by her own hands, turning worn fabric into something new. She wanted to give other women that same chance, the feeling that beauty and dignity did not belong exclusively to those born into privilege. But dreams cost money, and right now dreams had to wait. Tonight's event was a charity gala hosted by Hale Industries, one of the most powerful corporations in the eastern United States. Ava knew the name only because she'd seen it on billboards, financial articles, and luxury sponsorships. The company belonged to a man whose presence was more rumor than reality, Damien Hale, a self-made billionaire with a reputation for ruthless business strategies and an obsession with privacy. Some claimed he inherited old money, others whispered he built his empire from nothing but grit and brilliance. Ava had never seen him in person, nor did she care to. Men like him were a world away from women like her. Ava wove through the mingling crowd, offering glasses to executives in silk gowns and polished cufflinks. Though her smile remained soft and polite, she could feel the sting of exhaustion pulsing behind her eyes. Her feet ached in cheap black heels, the kind that offered appearance but not comfort. She reminded herself that this shift was one step closer to paying off her latest course enrollment fee, another inch closer to her dream. The music swelled, a string quartet shifting into a sweeping melody as the ballroom doors opened and conversation rippled with intrigue. Someone important had arrived. She could feel it in the shift of the atmosphere, like the room collectively inhaled. A hush spread softly before swelling into excitement. Cameras flashed. Ava turned only briefly, intending to continue her work, but her eyes froze on the man entering through the archway. Damien Hale moved with a quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. The air simply adjusted around him. Dressed in a tailored midnight black suit that framed his tall, athletic build, he carried himself with calm confidence, flanked by board members yet somehow apart from them. His eyes, a deep steel gray, scanned the ballroom not with arrogance but with awareness, as though he measured people not by wealth but by intention. There was something controlled about him, a gravity that drew attention even from those pretending not to stare. Ava forced her gaze away. He was just another wealthy guest, another reminder of the distance between the life she had and the life she wanted. She continued serving, unaware that fate was already adjusting its path beneath her feet. Hours passed before the collision happened. Quick, accidental, impossible to predict. The bar near the ballroom had begun serving heavier drinks, and a group of young men, loud and uninhibited, stumbled back toward the dance floor, laughing too hard, too unaware of their surroundings. Ava approached with a new tray of champagne, weaving through the bodies as she had done countless times without incident, when one of them spun suddenly, arm flung outward in exaggerated excitement. His shoulder slammed into her with enough force to knock the tray sideways, and before she could regain balance, her foot slipped on the polished floor. The world tilted. Glasses flew. Ava's breath caught in her throat as gravity pulled her forward. But she did not hit the ground. She fell into a chair. No, into someone sitting in a chair, and the momentum carried her fully into the lap of the man she had tried so hard to avoid noticing. Damien Hale caught her instinctively, one arm sliding behind her back to steady her while her hand pressed against his thigh for balance. The world did not slow, it stopped. She felt the strength beneath fine fabric, the controlled tension of a body trained and powerful, and it wasn't the physical contact that left her speechless but the realization of who she had fallen into. Her heart thundered against her ribs, breath tangled in her chest, and for a moment she could neither move nor speak. Damien's voice was low, controlled, and steady, though his eyes reflected surprise. Are you hurt? Ava scrambled upright, heat rushing to her face, mortified beyond measure as she stepped back, gripping the tray as though it could shield her from humiliation. I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. He stood as well, ignoring the spilled champagne droplets on his suit, focusing only on her. There is nothing to apologize for. Someone pushed you. Are you injured? No, she whispered, attempting to compose herself even as guests whispered, curious and judgmental. I'm fine. I'm terribly sorry. His gaze held hers a fraction longer than necessary, not invasive, not amused, but thoughtful, as though trying to understand her beyond the moment. Before Ava could escape, the event manager appeared, face tight with forced professionalism. Miss Collins, he hissed quietly, we cannot allow accidents like this. Please remove yourself from the main floor until further notice. Ava felt her heart sink. One mistake, though not her fault, could cost her entire paycheck, perhaps her job. But before she could respond, Damien's voice cut through the tension with a calm authority that held undeniable power. She is not to be removed, he said. The fault was not hers. In fact, I would prefer if she continued serving this section. The manager straightened instantly, his expression shifting to performative compliance. Of course, Mr. Hale. As you wish. He retreated. Damien looked back at Ava, offering a nod, not gratitude, not flirtation, but respect. You handled that well. Don't let anyone make you feel small for an accident caused by someone else. Ava swallowed, unsure how to respond, unsure why her chest felt tight from simple kindness. Thank you, she managed softly. I'll continue working. As she walked away, still shaken, Damien watched her with a subtle curiosity. He had attended hundreds of galas, shaken hands with mayors and CEOs, negotiated contracts worth millions, all without feeling truly moved. But for reasons he could not yet articulate, the woman who fell into his lap lingered in his thoughts long after she had disappeared into the crowd, her presence leaving an imprint deeper than the moment itself. And Ava, returning to her duties, tried to steady her breathing, not knowing that her life had just collided, literally, with a man who would change the direction of her future in ways she could never have imagined. Lines between worlds. The night after the gala seemed to stretch endlessly in Ava's thoughts, replaying not just the fall but the look Damien gave her afterward, steady, calm, as if he saw something more than a server in a borrowed uniform balancing trays between rooms of power. She lay awake in her small apartment, the ceiling fan clicking softly, the shadows of passing cars spilling through thin curtains. She tried to convince herself the moment meant nothing, that people like Damien Hale forgot encounters like hers before morning sunlight touched their windows. Billionaires did not remember waitresses whose shoes pinched their feet and whose dreams fit into spiral notebooks hidden beneath mattresses. Yet, the next day, while folding laundry and reviewing notes from her online business course, she found herself pausing, her thoughts drifting back to his voice, his eyes, the way he defended her without hesitation. She did not want to admit it, but that simple act of respect, rare in her world, lingered like a mark on her heart. At work the following evening she returned to routine obligations, polishing silverware, lining glasses on the bar, adjusting table settings with precision. Nothing in the restaurant hinted that her world had shifted, yet something inside her felt different. Confidence, subtle but present, whispered through her movements. When the shift manager walked by with his usual clipped tone, Ava did not shrink. She held her ground with professional calm, no longer feeling the same invisible weight pressing her into the background. Respect, when earned unexpectedly, had a strange way of changing how one carried themselves, even if only slightly. Minutes before guests began arriving, a coworker approached her with wide eyes, holding a sleek envelope sealed with black wax. This was delivered for you, she said, brows raised. Special courier. Whoever sent it has serious money. Ava blinked, confused, wiping her hands on a towel before taking the envelope, feeling its weight and texture. Heavy, embossed, far too elegant to belong in a server's hands. She slipped it into her apron, intending to open it later in private, but curiosity gnawed at her. When she finally unfolded the note, her breath froze. Thank you for your professionalism last night. Your work does not go unnoticed. If you are free this Friday evening, I would appreciate your company at a small dinner. Nothing formal, simply conversation. If not, there is no obligation. D. Hale. Below the message was a second piece of paper. A reservation card for a private rooftop restaurant known only through whispered reviews. It was a place where stars seemed closer than the city below, where reservations were accepted only for those invited by name. Ava stood still for a long moment, pulse racing. She could imagine 100 reasons to decline. It was unprofessional. It could risk her job. It crossed lines. And yet, deep inside her, a small voice of rebellion whispered that maybe life was not meant to be lived entirely by rules designed to keep people like her in the background. Still, fear was louder than hope, as it had been most of her life. She tucked the envelope away, unsure if she would reply at all. The rest of the shift passed in a blur, and when she stepped outside past midnight, exhausted and chilled by the night breeze, she was startled to see a sleek black sedan parked alongside the curb, not ostentatious but quietly powerful in presence. Before she could turn away, the window lowered and Damien Hale looked out, illuminated only by street lights. He was dressed simply, no tie, no polished armor of wealth, just a man in a dark coat, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Ava, he spoke her name like a single steady note, not demanding, not assuming. I hope this is not inappropriate. I wasn't sure you received the invitation. She stood beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, clutching her coat tighter, unsure whether to approach or retreat. I did receive it, she said carefully. But I don't know how to respond. I don't know what you want from me. He nodded slowly as though he had expected the question. Honesty, he said. That's what I want. A conversation. Nothing more. His eyes held sincerity, not entitlement. I am aware that my presence could complicate your work. I don't intend to pull you into anything uncomfortable. Ava exhaled shakily. People like you don't usually notice people like me. He stepped out of the car then, not rushing, simply closing the door and walking to stand beside her. Up close he seemed less untouchable, more human, still composed, still confident, but grounded. People say that because most of them look at the world through glass walls, seeing only reflections of themselves, he replied. But you were not invisible last night. You handled chaos, embarrassment, judgment, yet you stayed calm. That matters. Ava looked at him for a long moment, unsure how to hold the weight of kindness from someone used to commanding boardrooms and headlines. She did not want to be a curiosity or a passing interest, a novelty discarded once its appeal faded. She needed to know why fate had pulled their lives into intersection. What exactly are you asking me to step into? She finally whispered. Nothing more than a conversation, he repeated softly. If that conversation goes nowhere, then we thank each other for the time and move on. He paused, then added more gently, but maybe there is more to learn between us. His simplicity unsettled her. It was never that simple, not when worlds clashed. Ava took a slow breath, weighing fear against possibility, remembering the dreams she hid away, the nights she stitched fabric beneath cheap lamplight, the life she wanted beyond living paycheck to paycheck. She had always fought alone. She did not know what it meant to be seen by someone who had power to open doors. I'll think about it, she said, voice steady though unsure. Damien nodded rather than pressed. He stepped back into his car with a final glance that carried no demand, only patience. Whenever you're ready, he said. Your pace, not mine. The car drove away, leaving Ava in the chill of midnight with more questions than answers. The next morning, she awoke early, resisting the urge to text him immediately. Instead, she spent the day at a public library working through her business course, drafting designs, calculating budgets, reminding herself of who she was without the gravity of someone else's influence. She needed to make her decisions grounded in her identity, not the idea of his. By late afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through smudged train windows on her commute home, she finally pulled out her phone, typing a message with fingers that trembled from equal parts tension and excitement. I accept. Friday, 7 p.m. But only if it's a simple dinner and conversation. Nothing that turns me into a story or a spectacle. She waited only seconds before his reply arrived. Understood. I'm looking forward to it. Ava closed her phone, heart pounding. She was stepping into uncharted territory. Not because of his wealth, but because this felt like the first time in her life someone was meeting her eye to eye, not looking down, not looking past her, but seeing her. And for the first time in a long time, she realized the fear she felt was not about what he might do. It was about what she might become if she finally stopped holding herself back. A table set between two worlds. Friday arrived with a slow, rising tension that shadowed Ava throughout the day, beginning from the moment sunlight filtered through her thin curtains and stretching through every hour she spent preparing for the evening. She hadn't taken off work that day. Instead, she completed a morning shift, moving with quiet anticipation that only she could feel. The familiar routines of wiping counters, resetting tables, and delivering orders grounded her, reminding her who she was before stepping into unknown territory. But beneath the routine, something new pulsed, a mixture of apprehension and resolve, as though she were standing at the edge of a threshold that demanded she either evolve or retreat. She refused to let fear dictate her story, not this time. Life had never given her anything without effort, and if an opportunity appeared, whether romantic, professional, or simply human, she had to meet it with clarity rather than retreat. When her shift ended, she took the subway home rather than splurging on a rideshare, because discipline mattered to her goals. She planned every expense like chess moves, each dollar stretched for books, tuition payments, fabric samples, software subscriptions. People assumed poverty came from laziness. Ava knew it came from sacrifice. She reminded herself that she wasn't meeting Damien to become part of his world. She was meeting him as someone building her own. In her small apartment, she opened the narrow closet where her carefully preserved clothing hung in protective plastic. She did not own designer pieces or gowns that shimmered, but she did have one dress she made herself during a winter semester when money was particularly scarce and ambition particularly loud. It was a deep forest green wrap dress, tailored to her measurements, elegant without extravagance, modest but defined by subtle lines that traced her silhouette with confidence rather than exposure. It was a dress that said she valued herself, even if the world often overlooked her. She styled her hair in loose waves instead of the tight bun she wore at work. She wore light makeup that highlighted her eyes rather than transforming her face. Everything she chose aligned with a single principle: she would not pretend to be someone else to be seen. By the time she stepped outside, the evening air was cool, scented with rain that had not yet fallen, city lights glimmering against twilight. She reached the rooftop restaurant precisely at 7, just as instructed, where a host greeted her by name, something that immediately set her pulse racing. The rooftop itself was breathtaking, wide, open, surrounded by glass railings that offered an unobstructed view of the skyline. Candlelit tables, soft jazz playing, warm lighting casting a golden hue over every surface. No crowds, no photographers, no loud conversations, just refinement without spectacle. Damien stood near the edge, looking out across the city, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. Gone was the formal precision of the gala. Instead he wore a charcoal coat over a simple black dress shirt, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled, as though this space belonged to a version of him that rarely appeared in public. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, there was a moment of silence that stretched like breath held between two worlds. His eyes softened, not admiring her dress, not assessing her appearance, but seeing her presence as something meaningful. "You look," he paused, searching for words that did not cheapen the moment, confident. "That suits you." Ava felt the corners of her lips rise, not shyly but with a quiet certainty. "Thank you. I wasn't trying to impress you. I just wanted to show up as myself." "That's exactly why you impress me," he replied, motioning toward the table he had reserved for two, positioned where city lights spilled like constellations beneath them. They sat, and conversation unfolded not with forced politeness but with the ease of two people learning how to cross unfamiliar ground. They spoke of work first, her double shifts, his negotiations, the charity projects his company funded. But as the night deepened, the conversation shifted from surfaces to roots, peeling back the layers of who they were before titles defined them. Ava told him about growing up in a neighborhood where dreams were often discouraged because disappointment was easier to manage than ambition. She spoke about sewing clothes from scraps, saving wages from part-time jobs, teaching herself design through online tutorials and outdated textbooks. She confessed how long she had feared failure, not because she doubted her skills but because she carried the burden of being the only one in her family trying to break a generational pattern. "People think wanting more means being ungrateful," she said quietly, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "But sometimes it just means refusing to stay trapped in what you were born into." Damien listened with attentive stillness, his expression shifting from curiosity to respect. "You're not trying to run from where you came from," he said. "You're trying to expand beyond it. There's strength in that. Not everyone has the courage." Ava studied him for a moment, then asked, "What about you? People say you're a mystery, that you built your empire alone. Is that true?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly, eyes drifting toward the skyline as though looking backward through years. "I wasn't born into wealth," he said. "My father worked in factories until his lungs failed him. My mother worked at night shifts cleaning hospitals. They taught me to build, to endure, to fight. But they also believed success belonged to other people. I had to unlearn that." He paused, voice lowering. "The first company I built collapsed before it ever launched. I spent years feeling like I was begging the world to make space for me." His jaw tightened slightly. "So I made space myself. Ava realized then that they were not opposites at all. Their worlds differed only in scale, not in origin. Both had fought for dignity in systems designed to overlook them. Food arrived slowly, each course thoughtful rather than extravagant, herb-roasted salmon, delicate risotto, citrus-infused greens, yet Ava barely tasted anything. She was too focused on the conversation unfurling between them like a tapestry. There was no flirtation disguised as compliments, no empty lines meant to charm. Just two lives discovering resonance. As the night neared its close, a breeze swept across the rooftop, carrying the faint scent of rain. Ava stood at the railing, hands resting lightly on the glass, looking at the city stretched beneath her like a map of endless possibility. Damien joined her quietly, maintaining a respectful distance rather than assuming closeness. "You're thinking about something?" he said softly. "I'm thinking about choices," she replied. "How sometimes the hardest part isn't deciding what you want, it's believing you're allowed to want it." He considered that for a long moment. "You deserve a life that rises to meet your ambition," he said. "Not one that shrinks to accommodate your circumstances." She turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "And what do you want, Damien?" "Not from me, just in general." His answer was slow, measured, honest. "I want to build something meaningful with someone who sees the world honestly and refuses to be impressed by my last name." Ava held his gaze, feeling something settle quietly inside her. Not love, not yet, but alignment. A sense of being understood without being molded. He offered his arm, not out of possession but invitation. "May I walk you home?" She considered saying yes. She considered stepping further into this connection. But she also needed to protect her pace and boundaries, not because she feared him but because she respected herself. "Not tonight," she said gently. "I need to end this night holding on to my thoughts, not losing them in someone else's." He nodded, and despite the refusal, his expression softened with admiration. "Then may I drive you to your train?" This time she accepted. The ride was quiet, not awkward, just reflective. When she stepped out onto her street, Damien didn't reach for her hand or ask for promises. He simply said, "Whenever you're ready for the next step, I'll be here." Ava walked up the stairs to her apartment with steady footsteps and a racing mind, knowing something monumental had begun. Not a romance designed by fairy tales, but a connection rooted in growth, ambition, and choice. She didn't feel rescued by him. She felt awakened within herself. When their worlds collided. The following weeks unfolded not like a fairy tale romance, but like the careful knitting together of two lives that had grown in different climates, shaped by different weather, with roots that demanded patience rather than fantasy. Ava did not drop everything to be with Damien, nor did she allow his wealth to overshadow her own goals. She still took early morning shifts, still attended online classes, still drafted designs late at night under the warm flicker of a cheap desk lamp. But now there was a subtle shift, an added sense of momentum, as though having someone believe in her dreams made them more tangible. Damien never tried to pave her path with money or pull her into circles she wasn't ready to face. Instead, he supported in small but meaningful ways. One evening he surprised her not with gifts, but with a stack of used design books he tracked down from independent sellers, some out of print, their pages filled with notes from past creators. "I thought they might inspire you," he said, and it wasn't the books themselves that warmed her, but the fact he listened closely enough to understand what she valued: knowledge, craft, authenticity, not luxury. But life outside their small bubble remained complicated. People watched, whispered, assumed. At the restaurant where Ava worked, curiosity grew quietly into suspicion. Her coworkers noticed how often Damien appeared to pick her up after closing, even when he stepped out of the car instead of waiting, offering warm greetings to the staff rather than acting like someone above them. But kindness did not shield Ava from judgment. Some muttered that she must be dating up for opportunity, as if a woman with ambition had no right to be noticed without ulterior motives. Others speculated that Damien was simply bored, temporarily infatuated with a novelty before returning to women who fit his world. Ava heard fragments of these conversations in the break room, always spoken when people assumed she had stepped out of earshot, and though she pretended it did not affect her, the words planted seeds of insecurity that sprouted in quiet moments when her guard fell. Her manager, stern and tight-spoken, called her into his office one evening, his expression grave with a mix of control and jealousy. "You need to be careful," he said, arms crossed. "This relationship, whatever it is, blurs professional boundaries. Our clients expect discretion. If you become a distraction, you become a liability." Ava stood still, letting the words settle without reaction, because she understood what he implied. Appearances mattered more than truth. Choosing to walk a path that connected two worlds meant she would not always be welcomed by either. "I am not breaking any rules," she replied calmly. "I am doing my job just like I always have." The manager's lips thinned, his tone clipped. "Let us hope it stays that way." Although she walked out with her shoulders straight, the encounter left her uneasy. It wasn't Damien she feared losing, it was her independence, the identity she spent years building without help. She worried that accepting someone with power in his world might unintentionally erase her own. She needed space to think, to breathe, to separate her emotions from the noise around her. 3 days passed without her replying to Damien's messages, not because she wanted distance from him, but because she needed distance from everything that surrounded him. She immersed herself in work, forcing her focus into folded napkins and polished glasses, moving like a ghost through the dining room, trying to remind herself she was grounded, not drifting. But avoidance never lasts when someone genuinely cares. Damien arrived at closing time, not in a tailored suit but in a simple coat and worn boots, expression calm yet clearly concerned. He did not demand an explanation, merely waited outside leaning against his car, hands in his pockets, letting her choose the moment. When she finally stepped out, their eyes met with a quiet gravity that held more weight than any argument. Ava exhaled slowly, bracing herself with honesty. "I needed time to think," she said, voice soft but steady. "Not about you, about everything that comes with you." Damien nodded, listening without interrupting. She continued, "I've worked my entire life to stand on my own. And suddenly there are people whispering like I climbed into your world instead of building my own. I don't want to be seen as someone who took an easier path just because a powerful man noticed her." His expression softened with understanding, not dismissal. "Ava, strength isn't measured by struggling alone. It's measured by choosing connections that help you grow without losing yourself." He stepped closer, but not enough to close the space she needed. "If anyone believes you're standing because of me, that means they never truly saw how hard you fought to stand before I arrived." She looked away, voice fragile. "But I see it. And that's enough to scare me." Damien took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Then let me ask you something, not as a man who cares about you, but as someone who respects your ambition." He tilted his head slightly, eyes locked with hers. "Do you want to fight your entire life alone just to prove you can? Or do you want to build something alongside someone who respects where you came from?" The question struck deeper than she expected. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a request. It was a mirror held to her soul, forcing her to confront the line between independence and isolation. She realized she feared what others thought more than she feared failure itself, and that fear was still controlling her choices. She didn't want to live like that anymore. So she made a decision, not rushed, not dramatic, just quietly firm. "I'm not stepping back," she said finally. "But if we continue, it has to be slow. Organic. No spotlight, no pressure, no sudden leaps into your world. I need to grow at my own pace, and if you walk beside me, I need you to walk, not pull." Damien's reply came without hesitation. "Then we walk. Your pace." He didn't ask for a kiss, didn't hold her, didn't expect anything more than the truth she already gave. They simply stood together under the streetlight, understanding deeper than touch could express. The night wasn't romantic in a cinematic sense, it was quiet, honest, and profoundly real. When he finally drove her home, he didn't ask to come in. When she stepped onto the sidewalk, he offered nothing more than a parting line that felt like a vow, even though it held no promises. "I don't care what the world thinks," he said softly. "I care how you grow." Ava watched the taillights disappear into the night, and for the first time, she didn't feel torn between two worlds. Instead, she felt as though she was building a bridge, one steady step at a time, grounded in her own direction and strengthened by the presence of someone who didn't want to rewrite her life, only witness it. And while she still feared the judgment that lingered in shadows, she finally understood something deeper. Progress is not proven by the absence of doubt, but by moving forward despite it. Becoming who she was meant to be. Winter settled over the city like a quiet frost, the kind that softened street noise and wrapped tall buildings in pale light. Weeks had passed since Ava and Damien agreed to move forward slowly, and their connection evolved into something grounded, not defined by dramatic gestures or sudden confessions, but by consistency. They met after work at small cafes rather than private rooftops, they walked through bookshops and street markets where no one turned to stare, and they spent entire conversations discussing purpose rather than appearances. Damien continued to learn how to step out of his world without assuming his presence was a gift, while Ava learned how to allow companionship without sacrificing independence. If they held hands, it wasn't to prove anything to others, only to steady each other in moments of quiet understanding. During this time, Ava made progress on her business plans, not because Damien funded them, she still refused financial shortcuts, but because he challenged her thinking in ways she couldn't have done alone. He asked questions that forced clarity. Who was her target customer? What problem was she solving? What story should her brand tell? His influence was not money, it was perspective. And while that frightened her at first, she slowly realized that growing with someone doesn't mean losing oneself, only evolving further than one could alone. She submitted a business proposal to an entrepreneurship program, expecting rejection, but was invited to a formal pitch event instead. It was her first real opportunity to present her brand to professionals, designers, and investors. The event required formal attire and confidence. She had only one of those things. When Damien offered to help financially, she refused again, but this time not defensively. Instead, she said, "Walk beside me while I do this myself." He agreed, instantly understanding that support did not mean intervention, and that love sometimes looked like standing back with pride rather than stepping forward with solutions. The night of the pitch, Ava stood in her small living room wearing the same green dress she had sewn months earlier, hands trembling as she rehearsed her presentation in front of a cracked mirror. She had rewritten her speech 12 times, each revision closer to the truth of who she was. Her voice quivered not from fear of losing but fear of standing proudly for the first time in front of a world that once overlooked her. Damien drove her to the event but stayed in the audience rather than backstage. She stepped into the room alone, eyes forward, shoulders squared. The panelists, design executives, investors, and creative directors, watched her with polite interest as she began to speak. Her presentation did not open with numbers or trends. It opened with memory. She spoke about growing up with clothing that never fit quite right, about sewing pieces together from discarded fabrics, about how fashion too often excluded women who weren't wealthy, tall, or shaped like mannequins. She explained how her designs focused on dignity and function, clothes that moved with real women, that honored bodies without defining them, that brought confidence instead of comparison. Her voice steadied as she spoke not from a place of aspiration but identity. The panelists asked difficult questions, about budget projections, manufacturing timelines, marketing strategies, and Ava answered without hesitation, because these were not concepts she memorized for a pitch, they were the foundation of her dream. She left the stage with her heart pounding, unsure if she impressed anyone, but certain she had represented herself truthfully. When she returned to her seat, Damien did not congratulate her loudly or embrace her dramatically. He simply leaned closer and said, "You didn't ask the room for permission. You told it your place." That was the first time she believed she deserved to stand there. At the end of the event, when finalists were announced, Ava's name was not called. She did not win. She did not receive funding. As applause filled the room for the winners, a heavy silence settled in her chest, not disappointment in herself but frustration at how close she came. She stepped outside before anyone could speak to her, leaning against a cold marble railing overlooking the city below. Failure, she realized, no longer felt like proof she didn't belong. It felt like a call to keep going. The door had not closed, it had merely forced her to knock harder. Damien joined her quietly, giving her space before speaking. "You're not defeated," he said. "You're beginning." Ava looked up at him with tired eyes. "I wanted this so badly." "You'll get it," he replied with certainty. This wasn't the door. It was just the hallway. She laughed softly through the exhaustion, touched not by his faith in her but by the way he never tried to take her struggle away. Some people comfort by minimizing pain. He comforted by respecting its role. The next day Ava returned to work, not embarrassed, not resigned, but renewed. She walked through the restaurant with new posture, carrying trays and taking orders with the same professionalism but a different inner strength. She was no longer a server temporarily passing through life. She was a builder in progress. Even the whispers from co-workers felt quieter now, distant, unable to penetrate her sense of direction. When her manager spoke to her, his tone softened slightly, perhaps noticing that she no longer carried herself as someone who needed approval. 2 weeks later, while Ava sifted through fabric samples in her apartment, she received an email from an independent fashion journal that had attended the pitch event. They wanted to feature her designs in a series highlighting rising creators who didn't win but showed exceptional vision. It wasn't fame. It wasn't funding. But it was visibility, earned, not given. She forwarded the article to Damien only after her hands stopped shaking. His reply was simple: "You carved your own path. I'm honored to witness it." Months passed. Her first small collection launched online through pre-orders and local workshops. Orders grew week by week, slow, steady, authentic. She didn't need someone to open the door anymore. She had built her own entrance. As her brand expanded, so did her relationship with Damien, not through grand declarations but through everyday presence. They learned how to love without overshadowing, how to support without directing, how to stand together without standing in front of each other. One evening they walked along a quiet pier at sunset, hands intertwined without needing to define what that meant to anyone but themselves. Ava stopped and turned to him, voice soft but sure. "You never tried to change me," she said. "You just gave me space to become myself." Damien brushed his thumb across her knuckles, gaze steady. "You never needed changing. You just needed someone who saw the size of your dreams." The wind carried their silence, but it was the kind of silence that held understanding rather than absence. The city lights flickered across the water, and for the first time, Ava felt she was no longer living between worlds. She was living in a world she was actively shaping. She had fallen into his lap by accident. But she rose into her future by choice.